I am Joel McLeod.
I'm Roland Tanner.
And welcome to the 905er. Now, faithful listeners of this podcast might recall that last year, we talked about the current progressive conservative government's plans to build Highway 413. Now, just to recap for those of you who might not be aware, this proposed highway would stretch from the top of Halton near Milton, reaching up to north of Vaughan, connecting to Highway 400. Much of the area that will be used to build this project right now is prime agricultural farmland, as well as certain portions of the Greenbelt are also included in the project's plans. Now, a price tag associated with this highway runs between $6 to $10 billion, and that's a billion with a B. The benefits of the highway being built so north of us brings a lot of questions about its usefulness, and an off-cited fact about the project is that it will only save commuters at best about 30 seconds on their commutes. Now, for a while, it seemed that this project was going to remain in limbo, as opposition to it is widespread over various communities in the 905. However, recent comments by Premier Ford, as well as a new ad campaign by the Ontario PC Party, indicates that the Highway 413 is indeed a priority to be built for them. Now, not all are happy with this news. For years now, an online group of activists have been mobilizing in the various communities in the 905 which would be directly impacted by this highway. The Facebook group, Stop the 413, has regularly engaged civic, municipal, and provincial leadership through petitions, letter writing, as well as knowledge awareness campaigns to help build their opposition to the highway. One of the organizers of this group is Irene Ford, and today we invited her to join us. Irene is a community and environmental advocate, as well as a former municipal research analyst. She became involved with the campaign against the 413 when she saw what she perceived as the Ontario government's reduction of the impact of environmental legislation during the COVID-19 pandemic. As well, she has a lot of questions regarding the decision by Vaughan City Council to endorse 6 ministerial zoning orders, which would help the 413 being built, as they received very little input from residents such as herself. She joins us today to discuss the impact she believes the 413 will have on the community, as well as the environmental impact it will have surrounding the 905 region. And as always, we are encouraging you to help us support telling stories like this and to keep us going by supporting us on Patreon. For a small fee of only $7 per month, you can help this podcast continue to grow and to continue to tell the stories that are important to you here in the 905. And if that's too much for you, we also offer the chance for you to buy us a coffee for as low as only $5 or as high as you like. Any and all contributions are greatly appreciated. I'd like to thank Irene Ford from the grassroots Facebook group Stop the 413 for coming on today to chat with Roland and myself about, surprise, Highway 413, or at least the proposed Highway 413 running in the north of the 905 region. Irene, thank you for coming on to the podcast today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'm happy to listen to anyone who wants to hear me talk about this. So,
well, this has been we've talked about this before on the podcast months ago, and honestly, I think Roland and I kind of thought this was almost a done deal. There was talk about kind of stopping the 413 when the people like yourself were quite vocal and adamant against the project. A lot of municipalities were coming out against the project. And it kind of seemed that the Ford government was saying, okay, well, let's put this back on the back burner and let's focus on other priorities. And then that seems to have changed in the recent weeks. Let's start off talking about that and your group or your compatriots' perspective on the 413 kind of coming back onto the provincial radar.
Well, Doug Ford kind of, I think, did us a favor by making it an election issue because we thought it was going to be our job to do that. And he's done that for us and got it back in the media and got a lot of interest back in the project. So that's great, actually, for us. I think Doug Ford and the Ontario PC Party is kind of banking on people being very frustrated with traffic congestion and looking for solutions. And so they're supporting the highways. And so we spent a weekend at the Woodbridge Fair recently. And I have to say that every single person that we talked to, once they learned more about the highway, and some of which were even Doug Ford supporters, did no longer support the highway. Like people just really, they don't understand where it is. They don't understand how big it is, that it's 4 to 6 lanes wide. It's 170 meters wide. It's going to have dedicated bus transit that's and it's located where nobody lives. So it's taking a lot of infrastructure dollars away from our existing communities who desperately need infrastructure improvements. And so that's what we're trying to help people understand and to raise awareness about.
That's kind of a big point there, is that there's a lot of question about the necessity of this highway. I mean, Roland lives now in Hamilton. I live in Burlington. We are well versed in the traffic that is 905 traffic in the region. But we always keep hearing about, we need to build another highway, and that's going to fix the congestion on the QEW or on the 401. And I'm going to leave it to you. Clearly, your organization or your people feel differently about that. Do you want to kind of maybe explain to our listeners who are not as well versed in this topic about why you're opposed to the fact that the Highway 413 will not solve the traffic woes that are in the region?
A lot of my concerns stem from environment, and the highway is going to be environmentally destructive. It's going to go over farmland, some of the best farmland in Canada. It's going to destroy some very finite habitat that's left for endangered species in southern Ontario. And there's things like even air patterns that will be changed that will affect the monarch butterfly or other birds that, they won't be able to go over the highway if they build something like this. But beyond that, it kind of isn't going to solve anybody's traffic woes right now. So, if you live in Vaughan, this highway is at the north end. It's going to dead end at 400. So who's going to drive north to come back down south again? I can't see anyone who's going to do that. And I think it's the same thing for people who live in Brampton and even who live in Halton. Your traffic woes are much further to the south. And then we have the 407, which is largely underutilized, as was demonstrated by the small plane that landed on it this week that did not cause any traffic disruption. It was actually able to land and not cause an accident. So, I think there's just so many more solutions that need to be investigated first. And what this highway is really good for is sort of starting to degrade the land so that you can justify building sprawl and building maybe warehouses and other things around it. And I think it's also really good if you're a corporation who's in e-commerce or in warehousing and you're interested in goods movement. And I personally, as a taxpayer, am not willing to subsidize goods movement for private corporations and, or pave the Greenbelt so people can get their Amazon packages in 2 days. So I think people really need to say, well, who is this highway really for? Who is it really benefiting? And I don't think it's us. It's not the everyday people. And, in Vaughan, desperately, we need better transit at Jane and Rutherford. There's condos going up like crazy right there. The subway is, still quite a bit further south. So even though Vaughan is, saying we have this subway, you still have to take a bus to get there. And the transit's not great. So we need solutions that get people out of cars. We do not need solutions that keep people in cars, put more people in cars, or are going to just fill up again, because induced demand is a very real phenomenon. It's very well researched. Once you build more roads, once you build more highways, they just fill up and people just keep driving, right? But if you build more transit, then you'll get the ridership. But you're never going to get it if you don't improve it, you don't make it accessible. And, so there's a lot of reasons to not support it above and beyond, the kind of fundamental environmental reasons, and that we're in a climate emergency. And it's being bulldozed through during a pandemic as well.
You said right at the start, this is a road being located where nobody lives, which immediately kind of begs the question, why is it being built? Where's the pressure coming from to build this? And who builds highways where nobody lives? I mean, nobody does, unless you've got plans to make it somewhere where people do live. I mean, you've already kind of said, this really serves industry, if it serves anybody at all. Do you think? I mean, where do you think the pressure is coming on the government to build this? I mean, it's not from voters? There's good evidence to suggest it's not really coming from voters. Who is it coming from?
So the Toronto Star Friends with Benefits article did, a great piece last, I believe it was early April, it was released. And, there's this amazing map in it that shows the land ownership surrounding the highway. And it's, really big, well-known developer names who are also lobbying local and regional councils to get their land brought into the urban boundary so that they can develop it. And, so there's significant pressure coming from the development industry to get those lands opened up. And, having the highway, I'm sure would also help that. I also wonder a lot about, the construction industry, and yes, jobs are good. And yes, we need jobs. And yes, the economy has to recover, but not in a way that's going to drive the climate crisis further. And, and is just so detrimental to our health and to our future generations and to addressing the climate crisis. And so I think, I often wonder about the jobs. Metrolinx and Infrastructure Ontario, quite frankly, even though they're crown corporations, I believe, but they're really unaccountable and untransparent organizations that handle very significant contracts for the province. And, should this highway be built, it's going to be, $6 billion, $10 billion. There's a lot of money for the companies out there that are going to be able to build it. And there's even a lot of money for the consultants, right? They usually get 10% of whatever the construction costs are. So, it's even hard to believe the information. The consultants are even biased who are doing the environmental assessment because, it means future work for them. Although, whether intentionally or not, they are. But, I just kind of wonder, do they really want to say all the environmental reasons why you shouldn't build the highway? Because it means no future work for them.
And there was an environmental assessment already under the previous government, and that one pretty much came back saying this isn't needed, don't build it. Isn't that right?
So the GTA West environmental assessment, I can't remember the exact date it started, but it was in the 2000s. And so the terms of reference, it was done in two parts. It was phase 1 and phase 2. And phase 1 of the EA was actually looking at a really big study area. It was from Niagara, I think, over to where the 400 is. So up north where the highway is, around King Vaughan Road, south down to the 401. And so they were looking at transit solutions for this sort of entire area. And so they came up with a whole bunch of solutions, and some of them were widening roads or transit improvements and a bunch of other stuff. And then one of the conclusions of phase 1 was the GTA West corridor. And then after that, there was an expert advisory panel who looked at just the GTA West portion of it. And they concluded that the environmental assessment that they did in phase 1, concluding the GTA West, was fundamentally flawed for multiple reasons. But part of it being because it was looked at such a large area, and it wasn't really an EA about the highway itself. So I kind of feel like it hasn't received a proper environmental assessment. It's also not consistent with the Greenbelt plan, to my understanding, because it doesn't actually demonstrate need. So you're allowed to build infrastructure on the Greenbelt, but you also have to for something like this big of a project, you have to demonstrate need and not opportunity. And I think the highway is more about opportunity. So right now we're in phase 2 of the EA. And so what people don't understand is that this is not a decision about if we should build the highway. They're already saying the decision on if we should build the highway was made in phase 1, and ignoring the expert advisory panel report, like they're pretending like it doesn't exist. And now we're in phase 2. So what phase 2 is about how we build the highway and where the route will be. They're very different things, right?
There's a couple things on that I want to touch on. One is that you're saying to demonstrate the viability of the project to build in the Greenbelt. And there's a note that keeps coming up in my mind is the fact that the previous government's study on this said that at best we'd be shaving 30 seconds off somebody's commute if we build this highway. And that's not a $10 billion project to save 30 seconds on a commute to Toronto, which is ridiculous. Is that true, or am I getting my facts wrong here?
No, you're not. So there's this whole 30-second versus 30-minute kind of debate going, not debate, but statistics that are being put out. And so the 30-second time was about phase 1, actually. It was 30 seconds of time savings when they were looking at this entire study area. that was a much larger area. So in, I think, March of 2018, after the MTO and the GTA West project team, I think we're starting to get some resistance to this project. This 30-minute timing savings started to come up, which kind of, doesn't really make a lot of sense because it's a 50, I think it's 60 kilometers long, and you're traveling 100, 120 kilometers, and it's going to save you 30 minutes. So, but there's a lot of, there's no reports that have been released that actually substantiate this 30-minute time saving. And there was some questions asked during the York Region Council meeting of MTO staff, like, what year is this time savings estimated to have been made in? What assumptions are you making about people's use of transit or whether or not they're still on the car? How does this compare to using the 407? And, my recollection is that it was like some far off date in the future, and there was not real clarity around the assumptions they made to get to this 30-minute time savings.
Well, I mean, my question was always, it depends on the destination, right? I mean, I'm thinking, if I live in Burlington, if I was to get on this highway to drive, my only feasible destination would be probably going up north to bypass driving into Toronto, get on the 400, and then continue it up into like Muskoka cottage country. That to me is really the only viable solution, because if I want to get into Toronto, why am I going to go all the way up by King Vaughan and then double back to come down the 400 to go into the downtown? Well, I know. And same as if I was a truck, well, why am I going to spend all the gas to go up that way, turn around on the 400, and come back down to the 401 to continue my journey east? It does, like, there are practical assumptions that nobody's been able to satisfy my mind. And which brings me kind of to my next point is, what's been the response from the ministers responsible for this? I mean, I'm sure that you've written letters to the government, to the Premier's office, to the ministers' offices to say we're opposed to this. What's been the official response from them? Nothing.
They're absent. So I can elaborate on you. I mean, the short response is they're completely absent. There's no response. Minister Leachy is his riding will house the 413 in a lot of the really environmental sensitive areas of Vaughan that remain, and he doesn't respond. I speak to members in his community. I'm associated with them, and he only came out. So I think last August, so over a year ago, they started, sending emails and reaching out to him, and he was not responsive. And it was only in March when we started going to council, and then this started getting media attention. He did reach out to a couple of the constituents, but since that time, he's absent. I believe Sylvia Jones is in Caledon. My understanding is she is the same with that. I'm not as familiar with the Halton MPP. Brampton MPP, some of them are NDP, so they're a little bit more, their party has come out saying that they oppose the highway, so it's a little bit different that way. And Minister Mulrooney, who is the Minister of Transportation, quite personally, she needs to take some heat for this, and she is not speaking either. And the Bradford Bypass, a separate project that does have EA approval that will run south of Lake Simcoe, that's 17 kilometers long, was approved in 2002 at a time when climate change was not part of the conversation. The Greenbelt didn't exist. And they're using that EA approval to proceed with building it. And they want less environmental oversight than was required over 20 years ago, which is just absolutely ludicrous. And it's her riding. York Simcoe is her riding. And, the one unifying thing up there politically is the health of Lake Simcoe. And she needs to step up, and she needs to start speaking, because she's got one highway going through her riding. She has the 413 coming through, and she's not talking. It's all fluff if you look on her Twitter account, right? Like anything that can be positive, but I haven't heard her speak in the legislature. I haven't seen her quoted on any of this stuff, and I've never received a response from her office. I've sent 2 emails recently, one of which was about the 30-minute time estimate and what those estimates are actually based upon. And the other one was about the conservation authorities, because they have staff reports and they have communications documenting that the MTO is not responding to them, is not providing the information to them that they've asked for the highway.
I think it's something worth making listeners aware of. I mean, what you're saying is happens everywhere all the time with every ministry. And it's not just the PCs who do it. I just think they're much more experts at it. You just don't talk. The people who disagree with you, you just don't talk to them. You don't answer them. You don't say a word to them. You don't reply to emails. You don't go to the events they go to. You just and this government, more than any government, is not interested in environmental assessments or consultations or what the public thinks. It's already made its decision on every subject before it even gets up in the morning. Yes. I think of a better way of putting it than that. The decisions have already been made. It's about finding, if you're going to do a consultation, making sure you get the consultation that gives you the result you've already decided you want. And it's so destructive. I mean, beyond the obvious environmental side of the equation, it's so destructive to our democracy, our way of doing things when people operate like this. We saw it during the election federally. We'll see it next year in the provincial election. This thing of the candidates not talking to anybody. They're cutting off government from the people every single turn. And this is me definitely not asking a question, but just having my own say. But it's deeply disturbing. Please go ahead.
What are your thoughts?
So I do want to say, actually, and when MPPs, I wanted to add to my previous answer, when MPPs do actually respond, it's a very scripted answer, and it's very easy to deconstruct, and it's very evident that it's been, this is what you're supposed to say, right? It's not actually, and it doesn't, and it's the GTA West, which is not, they're the absolute worst. I call it non-answers. They are absolute experts at providing you a bunch of information that does not actually answer your question. And it's a form of actually shutting people down. And a lot of times it's really, complicated, difficult stuff to understand. And, it really enrages me, actually, because I think it's people have the right to express concern, and they have the right to speak up. And we're not all subject matter experts, and nor should people be expected to be that. And so when you respond at that level, it's a form of shutting people down. And I think it's actually strategic and highly inappropriate.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah.
And but to your other thought, what I wanted to say was, I've been thinking a lot during the pandemic, just based on the highway and even the way things are going at local and regional governance. And, a lot of things are broken. And I'm not an advocate for any political party right now because I'm so disappointed in so many of them. But I've been thinking a lot about the difference between government, which is politicians who we elect, and governance, which are the public institutions, the administration, staff that do the day-to-day stuff. And politicians have, I guess a lot of this neoliberal thinking that has allowed kind of government and governance to become weaker because, this belief that, leave the private sector alone, they'll regulate themselves, they don't need it. But what the result is that governance has actually become incredibly weak, and politicians are undermining staff, and staff are not able to come forward with recommendations, or the political process is interfering with the decision-making process. And it's very, very, it's a systemic problem. It's been going on for a long time, but it's just incredibly pronounced right now. And the pandemic is another thing that's amplified it.
You raised an interesting point there, Irene, and it's kind of a theme that we're hearing at the provincial level. Last week we had on members from Stop the Sprawl, Hamilton, Ontario, which kind of have the same ethos or the same. I don't want to say agenda, but I think ultimate same goal: protecting. Sorry, same
concerns. I would think
same concerns. Yes, thank you. You should be doing this, not me. But it was they want to preserve our green space, the environment, the Greenbelt, this viable farmland that is we're not making any more of. Mm-hmm. It's limited and to preserve it, protect it, and all that stuff. However, this current government seems to be hell-bent on development. And I'm wondering your sense on when, to play the devil's advocate role here and say, yeah, we need to build. My question is, when do we stop? Because, we could keep, The question I always have about building another highway is, yeah, we build a highway. When people start driving it and it becomes full, when do we build the next one? Where do we build the next one? And what's your kind of your take on that? What's your thoughts on just, do we just keep doing more of the same, which is build and a couple more neighborhoods, build another road somewhere, build another industrial center? When does this stop?
I don't think I can answer that. I think it stops when enough people get angry enough and speak up and let their politicians know that they won't take it anymore, which is, I think, what's happening with Stop the 413. I think it's. I'm gonna fumble here because I'm gonna give you a way more complicated answer than you want to get, I think. But so the other thing that I've observed when I've started doing a lot of my research on MZOs and on planning and on development issues and just how the things are working is, I think that there's fundamental problems with the way things are financed right now. There's fundamental problems with shareholder returns and just how companies are shell companies, and it's you can't actually figure out who opens it and you have to who owns it, and you have to follow this path. But we're making money off of money. We're not making, there's money being made off money, and I can't understand it. I can't understand where all the money is coming from for all this development either, right? And I think that we're spending money we don't have, which is really driving the environmental problems as well. And I don't think anything is going to change unless we change the way our financing system is working right now, right? So a lot of people are coming out, the big banks, and coming out against them because of, to not support climate change anymore. But I think it's even bigger than that. We need politicians, and this is far, far beyond my understanding, but we need politicians that are actually going to be willing to come in and trust the stock market, I guess. I don't know how else to put it. There was a Globe and Mail article the other day where it was it's perfectly normal for you to operate your business with extreme debt. It's actually encouraged to do so. And, so it leads to this constant expansion and building and developing, because you can finance everything because you can be in debt. And I think that's what needs to be fixed. But I'm not an expert. That's just my observation.
No, I mean, I think a lot of environmentalists, certainly, and a lot of people on the left would say, and I'm not necessarily advocating this myself, but it's definitely an argument that needs to be made, is our entire economy is predicated on growth, so the growth in the use of resources, the growth in the population, which obviously, when I was born, it was about 4 billion people. Now we're at 6 billion. That's a hell of a lot of people. And Canada in particular, our economy has been built on population growth, which means growth in exploitation of resources, which means more houses, which is fine. I mean, it's made Canada's economy what it is. But at some point, you do need to say, is this sustainable forever? And it's definitely a question I don't think gets asked very much, because it's an awfully awkward answer whichever way you look at it. It's well, you're talking about completely changing the way our capitalist society works if you take growth out of the equation. But
I agree with that. But I think I go back to when I was a kid or something like that. You wouldn't, if you couldn't afford something, you wouldn't buy it. Now you go and you mortgage your house, right? So we're able to consume at much higher rates because we're able to, get a line of credit against the house and do that renovation, or, so even in our own individual, I think, way that we live, and not all of us, some of us are, that divide is becoming quite great. Some people can't have no options at all. And that's unfortunate too. But I just feel like this ability to, just borrow more money and go out and buy it and consume is really driving a lot of this. And I think that if we couldn't, it would change our behaviors. I think we just need things, and these changes, they need to be almost automatic, right? So you can't, this individual choice actually, and coming back to, it's up to individuals to change their behavior. That actually defies action. When you're telling people, and I worked in waste management, I'm a big believer in recycling. I'm not saying I don't believe in recycling. But when you go back to, your individual action of recycling is going to solve everything. Well, no, that's not true. Like, we need collective action, and we need action, but it's systematic change that we need to have. And these things need to be automatic, right? They just need to be like, that's the way it is. It's like dog poop. I always go back to dog poop. It's a social norm. Never leave your poop. No, but if you leave your poop, everyone in society looks at you like you're, how could you do that? That's disgusting. Right. And I think we need some of these social norms to come out about the environment. And I think that's what we're starting to happen with climate change, where these behaviors like polluting and excessive development and paving over our source water and our headwaters, it's unacceptable. We won't take it anymore.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what the Greenbelt was about, was kind of a way to stop that systematic sprawl. I mean, that if you remember before the Greenbelt, there was a real concern, like, oh, we're just going to keep building the next subdivision. We're going to build the next strip plaza. We're going to build the next mall. And because we had all this green space kind of as far as the eye can see. And the assumption was always, oh, we could just keep building extend the road another few kilometers and we'll build another whatever it is that we need. And then the Greenbelt came along, and it kind of, I think we're finally hitting that wall. There was a bit of a buffer zone to the Greenbelt, but over the years we're getting right into the Greenbelt.
Well, that's what the current urban expansion that the government's proposing, that's essentially it. It's going to build right out to the buffer of the Greenbelt, and it's going to bleed into the Greenbelt, because you're going to have things like stormwater ponds on those adjacent, on the subdivisions that are built next to them, because infrastructure is allowed to be built on the Greenbelt, and then it will just, it will continue to bleed. I lost my point, but I think that development will be allowed on the Greenbelt as long as politicians let it happen, and as long as politicians don't enforce legislation. And that's the other piece. We have a lot of legislation saying that you can't do a lot of things, and it's just a cost of doing business. And companies are going out and they're doing it. I can tell you several sites in Vaughan that have just set up shop, and then they don't have the proper zoning. They haven't gone through the proper planning process, and Vaughan's reaction is just to bring them into compliance. Maybe not on the Greenbelt, but on farmland per se. Some on the Greenbelt. There's one site that's on the Oak Ridges Moraine and Greenbelt. It's like, beg for forgiveness later. I'm just going to do it, and then I'll ask for forgiveness later.
Well, that's kind of the mentality that's going on there. I mean, it's going back to that neoliberal philosophy that you were mentioning earlier in the podcast, that, it's my land, I should do whatever I want with it. The problem is, in the Greenbelt, that farmland isn't your land. Like that I don't want this to sound like, a socialist communist mentality, but we kind of depend on that farmland, because we depend on the farmers to grow potatoes and corn and peppers and carrots and all that stuff that we eat, right? It's there for us to, it's there kind of for our collective good, not an economic, just to eat, right? Like we need that farmland to grow crops, to have livestock be able to graze naturally, to have, for us to eat. And it's one of these things, like, nobody seems to make this connection that is, and also, water purification, the wetlands that are used to help make our waterways safe to drink, so it filters into Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, and all these things that we just kind of take for granted. Once we build on it, it's not coming back. Like you can't build a highway and then say, okay, we'll just plant crops underneath it. That's once it's gone, it's gone. We don't get it back. There's no do-overs. And I feel like that's something that nobody brings up anymore.
Well, I think the other thing that people don't get is in Vaughan, where the highway's going through, and Peel, if you look at the agricultural map, it's really quite striking. It is like class 1 and class 2 soil, which is some of the best farmland in Canada. Soil, takes centuries to make. It's a natural and physiological process that happens over time. And so it's a finite, non-renewable resource. And, we're not treating our soil like this. We're abusing it. And United Nations has come out and done some campaigns to try and help raise awareness of this. And then there's a lot, there's this belief that the White Belt is sprawl and waiting. And I think it's been around for a long time. And it's not. It's prime farmland. And we have to stop calling it White Belt. The other thing with a lot of this land is it's already owned by developers, because they bought it they bought it on speculation. And I'm sure they've probably been told things about what's going to happen with it that none of us are privy to, or those sort of things, but you can't prove any of that. And
I think there was just, you're right, there was an assumption, even from when it was created, that this was land that would be built on.
It's called Whitebelt land because
like,
it was, it's called Whitebelt because that was the color on the map, right? Like it's land that wasn't in the urban boundary and it wasn't in the Greenbelt. So they started just calling it Whitebelt land. It's not to my knowledge, it's not a defined legislative term. It's just a term that those particular lands have assumed. And it's a narrative, I think, that developers and politicians, pro-developer politicians have, kind of facilitated, that it's just sort of sprawl and waiting that will be opened up one day. And, we have a very pro-development government that wants to make that happen. I do want to say on the farming point, because California is going through an extreme drought. And, there was a Globe and Mail article the other day, and it said it had a term I'd never heard before. It was exceptional. So there's now a term that's even above extreme for drought in California. It's exceptional. So they're going to start putting in a lot of water restrictions in California. Ontario gets a lot of its food from California. In the winter, a lot of our fresh produce comes from there. And cost of food's rising. I don't think anybody who's gone to the grocery store recently is going to argue with that. I know that my bill frequently goes up over 300 and it's hit 400. And I don't ever remember that happening before the pandemic, unless I was, going to the cottage for a week or something. So the cost of food is going to keep rising. And to lose these lands seems so short-sighted and irresponsible of politicians who are enabling it to happen. Against, actually, I would say, the recommendations of staff and subject matter experts as well. That's the other thing, right? There's a lot of political decisions that are happening right now that are purely political. They're not actually based on good, expert advice, on subject matter experts, on the research. And the politicians need to get called out on that. And we need to support our politicians to make the right decisions. That's also another problem. And a lot of these problems they're wicked problems. There is no easy solution.
We're just coming up on the last couple of minutes, I think, here. I just wanted, you mentioned briefly in passing just the role of municipalities in this. I know in Halton and certainly in Halton, and I believe in Mississauga, there was kind of fairly, Peel, I should say, there were fairly strong statements initially against the highway. And then there was a very strange thing that happened in Milton, where the Milton Council suddenly reversed its position. And then in Vaughan and, I believe in your part of the world, kind of north of Toronto, the cities are acting quite differently with regard to this road. Is that right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Vaughan is where my municipality. So we have 5 local councillors, a mayor, and 3 regional councillors. Our 5 local councillors voted to withdraw support for the highway. Our mayor and regional councillors maintained their support. So Vaughan as a municipality withdrew its support. The region of York maintained its support for the highway. The region of York also made a decision recently, it's called yesterday, actually, ROPA 7, which downgrades Greenbelt protection. So it's not actually taking the Greenbelt out, but it's allowing rural, like park uses on agricultural lands and it's a private request of developers to do so. So York region, in my humble opinion, is they're making decisions that support developers, and regardless of what the public or their staff or subject matter experts say, and it's really alarming. It's actually one of the decisions that I've been more disturbed by since I've started following municipal politics and a lot of these other environmental issues that concern me. Caledon, as a municipality, supports the highway still, but the region of Peel withdrew their support. Milton, I think Milton tried to put a motion in to withdraw their support, and it wasn't successful. So I think Milton's kind of neutral; like they don't support it and they don't not support it.
Yeah, well, they voted one way.
Withdrawn it.
Yeah, they've
withdrawn their support.
So Milton councillors, I think Milton councillors are regional and local, I believe. That certainly happens in quite a few of the cities here.
Yeah, I think Milton is part of...
And at the regional level, they voted against. And then at local council, suddenly some of those councillors changed their mind. And the timing was interesting. Let's just leave it at that. But anyway,
So after
obviously,
we took so when we went out and we got together, the community groups came out, and I think we really surprised a lot of the municipal and local councils, because they were saying, well, there's nothing we can do. It's a provincial project. And we were like, well, yeah, you supported the project. So clearly you supported the highway. So clearly there's something that you can do. You can withdraw that motion and withdraw your support for the highway. And that was kind of how we started. And I think that really blindsided a lot of local councils, and because they weren't, I don't think they ever thought they were going to get called out on expressing that support for the highway. And some of the motions were like, support it and build it as fast as you can. And we were like, hello, you never asked us. Did you ask anybody? Did you consult with the public? How can you take that position when you haven't even asked your constituents? And
the development industry in Vaughan is very strong, isn't it? I've heard say over the years.
It is really strong. And so what put me over the edge and made me such a vocal advocate was the arrival of 3 MZOs on a Vaughan Council agenda as an addendum. So there was absolutely no opportunity for the public to, have any feedback at all. They were put forward by our Mayor Bevilacqua. And I was like, what is happening? Like, I used to work in municipal governance. I was like, how is this even happening? Like, why is this here? Like, I don't get it at all. And the more I would research it, the more I would just be really concerned about, why the mayor was pushing this and the role of staff. And even to this day, the 6 MZOs that Vaughan has endorsed were not reviewed by staff or legal. So prior to our council endorsing them. So what's the liability to the city of Vaughan is my question. If, things go south on this, and there's lots more sketchy things, like I have no idea who wrote the very technical whereas clauses. I don't think it was the mayor, and staff said that they didn't write them. So that leads me to believe that the developers wrote the whereas clauses and they got direct access to our council agenda. And I find that highly concerning to have that level of influence. And this is happening all the way through. And, there's been newspaper article after newspaper article about the PC government and, them basically catering to who lobbies them. So there's not equal access, and there's a lack of fairness right now.
I think that's something we should maybe pick up on in another interview, and I think it'd be a very, very interesting subject to delve more into.
The point I wanted to make was that what I realized when I started researching at Vaughan Council was only developers were coming to speak and give deputations. And our council was taking these deputations like they were the public interest. And they're not. Those are the interests of the private interest of the vested financial interests of the developer. And, it was really shocking to me. And, and this has gone all the way up. I equate what's happened since the pandemic started with like having a belief system dismantled. What I thought government was and what it is are not one and the same.
I think we're going to have to leave the episode on that note because we're coming up on our limit here. So I'm just going to say thank you very much, Irene, for coming with us and sharing those thoughts. This is, unfortunately, we thought this story was kind of on the way out. It appears not to be the case. So we'll probably have you and hopefully someone else from Stop the 413 on again to follow up with the next developments. So thank you very much, Irene, for your time today, and we wish you all the best on your endeavors.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I'm just thrilled that you want to hear what I have to say, because I'm highly concerned, and I think that awareness needs to be raised, and people need to participate. People need to know what's going on. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns, or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.